My fiancé's family came to our house unannounced and removed my name from everything. I responded by removing something of theirs. I want to say upfront that what I did was calculated. I'm not going to pretend it was impulsive or emotional, because it wasn't. I thought about it for approximately 45 minutes, concluded it was proportionate, and then did it with complete clarity. I'm telling you this because the reaction from some people, including Vivian, initially, was that I had overreacted. And I want that framing to be on the table right from the start, so you can judge it yourself. My name is Nathan. I'm 34 years old. I work in financial services. I grew up in a working-class family in the north of England, went to university on a scholarship, built my career from the ground up. I am not, by any measure, the kind of person Vivian's family envisioned for her. Vivian and I met 4 years ago through work. She was consulting for a firm I was advising, and we were in the same meeting for 3 hours and ended up in the same pub afterward with a group of colleagues. She laughed at something I said about the meeting. I told her she had terrible taste in wine. By the end of the night we'd exchanged numbers and I'd already decided I was going to call. Vivian's family, the Hargreaves, are what you'd call old money. Not obscenely wealthy in the contemporary tech billionaire sense, but established in the particular way that comes from 3 or 4 generations of accumulated land and capital and the social assumptions that go with it. They holiday in the same places every year. They have a family seat in the countryside that requires maintenance they discuss at dinner as though it's a minor administrative burden and not a significant statement of who they are. From the beginning, Diane, Vivian's mother, made it clear that I wasn't quite what she'd had in mind. She was too polished to say it directly, of course. It came through in other ways. The slightly too long pause before she responded to something I'd said. The way she'd sometimes address Vivian as though I wasn't in the room. The comment at our second family dinner about how fascinating it was that I'd gotten where I was from where I'd started, said with the smile of someone who believes they're being generous. Vivian told me repeatedly not to take it personally. She said her mother was like that with everyone who was new. She said Diane would come around. I chose to believe her because I loved Vivian and because the alternative, accepting that the family I was marrying into had decided I was insufficient before they'd properly met me, wasn't something I was ready to sit with. We got engaged 8 months ago. Vivian was thrilled. I was thrilled. The engagement party was held at the Hargreaves country house, a grand, slightly theatrical affair that I felt vaguely like a guest at rather than one of the principals. Diane smiled at me throughout. I smiled back. We maintained our polite fiction. I was in Edinburgh for 4 days in October, a client meeting that stretched into a full week of reviews and presentations. The kind of work trip where you're too busy to think about anything outside the room you're in. I called Vivian each night, brief check-ins, both of us tired. Everything was fine. Everything was normal. I flew back on a Thursday evening. Taxi from the airport, into our building, up to the flat. The moment I stepped through the door, I felt something was off. The particular wrongness of a space that's been rearranged while you were away. Not dramatically. Subtly. A lamp in a different position. The console table by the door cleared of the things I usually left on it. I went to check the post. We had a small mailbox in the building lobby. The label had been changed. Where it used to read Nathan Collier and Vivian Hargreaves, it now read only V. Hargreaves. I stood in the lobby staring at this for a moment. Then I went upstairs and opened the kitchen drawer where we kept the flat file of important documents. The tenancy agreement, which had always carried both our names, which I had signed, which I paid a significant portion of each month, had been replaced with a copy that showed only Vivian's name. I checked the utility accounts online. My email address had been removed from the account notifications. The broadband account, which I had set up in my name, had been moved to a new account holder. Systematically, methodically, every administrative trace of my existence in the flat I shared with my fiancé had been quietly erased. I called Vivian. She answered on the third ring with a slightly too casual, "Hey, you're back." I said, "Viv, why has my name been taken off the tenancy?" A pause. "Oh, Mum and Georgie came round while you were away. They were just helping me organize some things." I said, "Organize things?" She said, "It was just easier, administratively, to have things in one name. Less confusing." I said, "Whose idea was it?" Another pause. "Mum just thought. Vivian, did you ask them to do this?" A longer pause. "Not specifically. But I didn't stop them." I said, I see. I'll talk to you when you're home. I hung up the phone, and I sat down at my desk, and I started thinking. 2 years earlier, as a gesture of goodwill toward the Hargreaves, specifically toward Diane, who was the driving organizational force in the family, I had offered to help administer the booking for their annual charity gala. They held it every November at a venue in central London, a significant event that raised money for a cause Diane was on the board of. I had contacts at the venue, knew the event's coordinator personally, and it had seemed like an easy way to contribute something tangible to the family I was joining. I had set up the booking in my name as the administrative contact, handled the deposit payment coordination, managed the vendor liaison, and basically run the logistical back end of the event for 2 years. It had never occurred to anyone to take me off the account, just as it had apparently not occurred to anyone that taking my name off my own tenancy agreement required my consent. I called the venue. I spoke to the events coordinator, a woman named Sandra who I'd worked with for 2 years and who liked me. I explained that I was stepping back from my coordination role and that the Hargreaves family would be reaching out directly to confirm arrangements for this year's event. I noted that several vendor confirmations were still pending and that the deposit timeline for the catering upgrade had lapsed and would need to be addressed directly. I removed myself from the account. I thanked Sandra and wished her well. Then I called the florist, the AV company, and the table decor supplier, all of whom had my number as the coordination contact, and let them know they'd be hearing from the family directly from now on. The gala was 23 days away. Diane found out the next morning when Sandra from the venue called to confirm that the Hargreaves had received the pending vendor list and whether they'd like to schedule a call to go through the outstanding items. Diane, who had never dealt directly with any of the event logistics, was apparently quite surprised. She called Vivian at 9:30 in the morning. Vivian called me at 9:35. "Nathan, what did you do?" I said, "I removed myself from the event account." "Why?" "The same reason your mother removed my name from my own flat. I thought we were all simplifying our administrative arrangements." A silence. Then Vivian said, very quietly, "That's petty." I said, "Is it? Because what happened to the tenancy feels considerably more significant to me than a gala vendor list. One of those things affects where I live. The other affects your mother's centerpiece coordination." Vivian said, "She is going to be furious." I said, "I imagine she is. I'd like to talk about why the thing that made her furious was removing myself from an event account, rather than the thing that should have made me furious, which was entering our home without my knowledge and erasing my name from the paperwork." Another silence. Then Vivian said, in a different voice, quieter, more careful, "She crossed the line." I said, "Yes, she did. And so did you, by not stopping her." A very long silence. "I know," she said finally. The conversation that followed that evening, when Vivian came home, was the most important one of our relationship. Not because of the gala or the tenancy or any of the specific events of that week, but because it finally forced us to talk about the thing we'd both been avoiding for 2 years, her family, my place in it, and what kind of marriage we were actually planning to have. I told her everything I'd observed over 4 years, the small exclusions, the polite condescensions, the way I consistently felt like a guest at my own engagement party. I told her that I had been patient and uncomplaining because I loved her and because I believed she was right that things would change. But that watching her mother walk into our flat, remove my name from our shared documents, and hearing Vivian describe it as just organizing told me the change I'd been waiting for wasn't coming on its own. Vivian sat with all of it. She didn't argue, she didn't defend her mother in the reflexive way she sometimes had in the past. She said, "I've known for a long time that she doesn't think you're right for me. I've been hoping that if I just kept the peace long enough, she'd eventually see what I see." I said, "And what do you see?" She looked at me and said, "Someone who was willing to take a small, precise action that cost him nothing but made a very specific point. Which is exactly what I needed to happen, actually." I didn't expect that. I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I mean I've been watching my mother underestimate you for 4 years. And part of me has been waiting to see what you do when she finally went too far. And now I know." I said, "And?" She said, "And I think I need to have a conversation with her that I've been putting off for a very long time." 2 weeks later, Vivian had that conversation with Diane. I wasn't in the room. I don't know exactly what was said. What I do know is that Diane called me the following day and said, stiffly but directly, "I owe you an apology, Nathan." I behaved inappropriately. I said, "Thank you, Diane. I appreciate that." And I meant it. The gala went ahead. Vivian's sister Georgie handled the logistics. Sandra told me afterward it had been slightly chaotic. I said I was sure they'd managed. Nathan's story isn't really about a name on a document or a vendor list for a charity gala. It's about what happens when someone finally decides that being accommodating has limits, and what it looks like when the person you love is finally ready to see that too. The most important battles aren't always the loudest ones. Sometimes the most effective thing you can do is simply, calmly, remove yourself from an account. Leave a comment. Was Nathan right or wrong? And subscribe. Next week's story might actually top this one. Stay with me for part 4, because what Diane says when she finds out is something else entirely. And hit subscribe so you never miss a story like this.